This is All the Things with Michelle Wolf. All right, so we are here this is episode 3 of All the Things, and I'm here with my friend Jen. And today we are going to talk about shadow work, and potentially burnout. So I know that you and I feel like in the last few years, especially for me, I'll speak for myself. Shadow work has really amped up. Lots of opportunity to dig in, And um, so I don't know where we want to go with that. We want to talk about what shadow work is, and then talk about how you can, how if you don't have boundaries with that, you can just sort of be picking at a wound.
Goodness, yes.
Boundaries with yourself are so important.
They really are.
But we should probably just talk about what shadow work is first.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very glad to be here.
I'm so happy to have these conversations with you because I feel like these are things that we talk about, anyway. And I know that we've had this conversation many times where we've been like, I wish that we could have recorded what we just said. It was really insightful. Um, so I just appreciate your willingness to have these conversations out loud. Because I know this is a vulnerable space when we're talking about, digging into our stuff, our deep dark shit, you know? Bringing it to the surface, shining that light on those parts of us that are hard to look at and hard to feel into because it's not comfortable.
It
So,
is certainly not comfortable, and learning how to do it effectively for us as individuals. There certainly are key components that I believe that we all share. And there's also well, how do I dial into myself in such a way that it's effective?
mhm.
Not what you're doing or the person over there on the left is doing, but how do we activate it in us in ways that are sustainable without, as you said, picking at the wound or just bypassing it altogether?
Mhm.
I mean, I know I get a case of the fuckets all the time. And it's normally all or nothing on a bad day when I'm doing something like walking through a grocery store and watching my own shadow parts come out all over the place and calming myself down and remembering that I'm part of a community and that I'm an adult and I know how to use my big girl words.
Yeah, oh, I love that. How do you know when shadowy stuff is coming up? Like how does it show itself to you?
Most of the time, sarcasm.
Okay, I like that.
And biting sarcasm, not the kind that is welcome at a roundtable discussion, the kind where I ask myself, whose voice is that? It's not me.
Oh, yes. I love that you just because as you were saying that, I was thinking about that answer is for me, and for me, it's criticism. And when that comes up for me, I say the same thing. Whose voice is that? Or I
Yeah,
kind of know whose voice it is at this point, but you know, being aware that that voice exists is so much of it. And I do think that that sort of sense of that voice is related to shadow work. Like I think that
yes.
that goes hand in hand. At least that's been my experience.
And I am a very thoughtful person. So there is almost always some sort of dialogue running in my head.
Same.
So, and a lot of times it's doing, I mean, like processing emotion or trying to figure out how I feel about something versus just what I think about it. But there's always something running in the background.
Mhm. Same. It's a constant dialogue.
Yep.
Yeah. Being really mindful of like I've in the last 2 years especially, I've gotten really clear on sort of the different dialogue that runs in my head and the different voices that come along with that. Um, and just but for me, like, I can tell that I'm in my shadowy shit when I'm in that, like, it's self-criticism and it's a mean voice. It's not just, "You can do better." Like, it's ugh, so stupid. It's shame, it's guilt, it's judgment.
I
Yeah.
call them conversation terminators.
Oh, okay.
So whatever it is and how it's running is meant to shut me down.
Oh, I love that.
It's meant to silence my voice, and it's
Make you
meant,
small.
yep, and it's a conditioned response.
Mm,
One that was conditioned in childhood, one that I conditioned through my own choices,
mhm.
and it's also to a certain extent supported and glorified, especially for women, I have found.
Say more about that.
I am a people pleaser, this you know.
Same,
I am
same.
also
Well, I'm a
yeah, I am
recovering
al
people pleaser.
yes, I'm also a recovering perfectionist.
Yes, me too.
And as women, we are I mean, let's look at all the narratives that exist, whether we believe in them or not. Eve was constructed from Adam's rib. So we weren't even a whole person. We
Mhm,
came out of some random dude. It women couldn't vote for a long time. They couldn't own property. They had to switch their name to their husbands. I mean, this list of things goes on. So, in which it is permissible for us to exist as women, as female identified people,
mhm.
is smaller than what it is for men. And
Yeah,
depending upon which external system or structure we're playing in, we're expected to show up in a certain way. And when we don't, that becomes friction. So, depending upon the conditioning of our upbringing, a lot of it is also age. I mean, I have conversations with my mother frequently about her experience of being in the workforce in the 80s and 90s and what that was like for her.
mhm.
And it was way different.
How was it
Yeah.
different for her? I just
She
had this conversation with somebody today, so I'm so curious.
mhm. She and my father owned their own business before they retired, and it was a construction supply. So you're talking about dealing with contractors in a traditionally male type of service industry.
Mhm.
And there was certainly a dichotomy between front office and back office.
Sure.
And the back office, not surprisingly, was full of women. And then the front office, where you're looking at salespeople, was more men because men in general were more welcome on construction sites. It's a very
It's a male-dominated industry for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
very much so.
Mhm. Even still.
Still, absolutely. So every conversation she had was inside the framework of this is a male dominated industry.
Mhm. And you
So
have to operate in this box right here.
yeah,
Yeah.
here's what's appropriate and inappropriate.
Yeah.
And she had to work twice as hard and develop a very thick skin in order to be able to function in that environment.
Mhm.
And I have vivid memories of going to visit mom and dad at the office. And the mom that was at the office was somewhat different than the mom at home.
Yeah.
And I know that was very hard for her at different points in time. She
Do
was
you
also oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
She was also seen sometimes as the boss's wife,
Yeah.
and my dad was never seen as the head of accounts payable's husband.
Oh, sure. Do you think that growing up with that and seeing the difference in her in one environment and then in another, like, did that create some sort of splitting effect for you or
Absolutely. I was experiencing splitting as far as which gen needs to show up in which environment, and it was more which environments am I actually permitted to be authentic
Mhm.
versus the whatever mask I need to wear to get the job done.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and you just said the key word right there, authenticity, and I think that in terms of shadow work, like, I mean, one of the things that I've experienced is in I think for a long time for me, in wanting to be the good girl, right? Like we said, like I was a people pleaser. I wanted to be the good girl. I wanted to be nice and pleasing. And so I pushed these parts of myself. It's like I covered them up. I buried them. Like I wasn't going to look at them. I was going to deny those aspects of me. And it really wasn't until, um, well, I mean, it was a couple years ago that I really started to get in touch with the bad girl parts of me. The parts of me that um and this is also tied with my I want to say root chakra and sacral chakra energy and I'm just speaking for myself and I think that shadow work can probably be tied to many different, energetic centers in us, but for me specifically it was root and chakra and sacral. Um in being able to be trusted wielding sexual creative energy, life force energy, like in a way that is in alignment with my integrity. And I will be honest, it wasn't always the case. Sometimes that energy wielded me.
Mhm,
And so learning to like really look at having the courage first of all to look at myself and be honest and say, if I want to be operating in this healing space and I want to hold a safe container for others, and I need to really be um, demonstrating that, living that, walking my talk in my life. And so I started like sort of, I don't want to call it excavating, like those parts of me that I had suppressed. Because when you do that, when you cover it up, when you push it aside, it still exists within you. You've just covered it up, and so but it's still there and it's still pulsing underneath. And it's not until I like shined a light on it. And you were saying something earlier and it made me think of like the shadow makes us shrink. And it's not until we expose it and we shine light on it. And sometimes that means sharing it with others in a safe space to let it sort of dissolve. And now it's like those parts of me that I wanted to deny, that I wanted to pretend like weren't true, that I wasn't that way or whatever. It's like like now I'm looking at them and I'm like, okay, I see you. I see this part of me, this bad girl part of me, this girl that wasn't always trustworthy. This girl that she wanted this and she was maybe a little greedy, like whatever those parts were I, like, started to, like, sort of look at them like a puzzle piece. And it's like you take that puzzle piece and you pick it up and you look at it, you kinda turn around, you're like, "What if I put it here?" And, "Oh, it does fit, and it makes the whole." And it's not about denying those parts of me, it's about accepting that those parts of me exist, that I can choose to operate like that, but that isn't how I want to be. That's not who I want to be. I want to walk my talk and live with integrity and operate in that space. And so it's almost like I took the reins
mhm.
in doing that, and now it's like I'm armed with I know what my stuff is. I know what I'm capable of. And I love that I like my authentic self now gets to shine because I've integrated those parts instead of denying them, you know?
You've made them work for you
Mhm.
rather than against you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And shadow for me always exists for a reason. It didn't just show up there for no reason. It was a response strategy to something in the external
Mm,
that at the time I didn't possess the ability to process the emotion around.
that's so important. Yes, I love that you said that. Yep.
So doing shadow work, at least for me, has taught me responsibility.
Yes,
And
accountability too.
yeah, and not even so much in the responsibility of the way that we traditionally think of the word of like, I'm responsible for this thing and this thing and this thing as if it were a job description or a job task. It's I have the ability to respond to that in an integrated, authentic way
Yes.
without resorting to something that I would consider an environmental manipulation.
Yes. And creating further like wreaking havoc and creating more destruction. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not an easy thing to do. It because we
No,
live in a
it can be really hard to look at those parts of yourself and come to terms with that. You know? I mean, I'm not gonna I am willing to own it. I've owned it out loud and I'll own it again. But like when I had an affair and people think like, oh, I've heard so many things. Infidelity, once a cheater, always a cheater. Um, I did not feel good about that.
yeah.
And I mean, I get so sad when I hear people say that, like once a cheater, always a cheater. And there was one day I was dying to write this long post about it, but I felt like my message would be lost in translation and in the reading of it. Maybe it'll be different when it comes out of my mouth, but you can absolutely make choices like that and then never ever want to do that again. And you can walk down that road and see yourself walking down that road and being like, you know what? This is not a road I really want to walk down, and make those changes. And so it's so defeating when I hear things like that because it's really not true. And you can have enlightening experiences when you're dancing in that shadow,
Hmm.
because
And
that's my shadowy part. And I don't want
yeah.
to be that girl, but I don't, I struggled with this for a long time. I was angry at myself. I was judging myself. And so I really think in the last year, and partly because of the relationship that I was in, being with somebody who he didn't judge me or like there was no shame in me sharing that story with him, you know. Um it really helped me to heal that like my sacral chakra. And now that dysfunction, whatever that was that existed, it's not there. Like it's gone because it's integrated and whole. Where I wasn't, I was fractured before.
Hmm. You found a situation where you could present it, speak to it authentically, and then
Mhm.
integrate it
Mhm.
because shame lives in the shadows.
And what it did for me is, you know, I feel like it's really easy to judge people for something like infidelity, and we want to shame people that make these choices when honestly, the percent I don't know what they are offhand, but the percentages of people that have affairs is pretty high. And I mean, that's not an excuse. It's still a betrayal and all those things. But it's like instead of making that part of me wrong and bad, and this is part of shadow work, it's like I started to dig into like, well, why? Why did I do that? Why? Like, what was that about? And just making it really like about my journey into that experience. And it's like, it just, it brought so much clarity, and understanding like, well, where did that pattern even start? Like, some of those things were exemplified in my life. I mean, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but like there were some people in my life that's what I learned. That's what I saw. And then you add in growing up with, I mean, uh, soap operas and media and all the things. It's like, and also we should recognize that we are sexual beings and we like this is sort of part of our nature as well. So it made me able
Absolutely.
to sit with people who had done things that other people would shame and judge them for, and to hold space for people in their shame because I know what it feels like. And I think that that is really powerful, that level of empathy. And unfortunately, sometimes I seem to be one of those people that has to learn it myself. So,
When was it? I think it was about 2005. And it was right about the time where personality tests started being more readily available.
okay.
And actually, it may have been a little bit later than that because I think it was at the onset of social media. And it became that I remember so vividly that I had taken several of these tests, and it came back that I had an extraordinary ability to swing information. And it would come back in positive ways, like I'm creatively constructive. And I remember reading that and going, that's as much a trauma response as it is authentic Jen.
Mhm.
And it got me really curious of, well, this is not a behavior I'm proud of. It
Yes.
doesn't feel good in situations where I have to use it. And the only time that I was really identifying when I was using it was when it was negative, where it was something where I was looking at it and going, this may have been a little bit out of integrity for me.
Mhm.
And then there was the moment where it occurred to me, how much of this is in integrity? How much of this is actually authentic? Because I have the ability to look at information and see it from multiple perspectives. I have the ability to be empathetic and empathic in situations where a lot of people do not.
Yeah.
So I can't throw myself under the bus without looking at, well, A, what did this do for me? Did it keep me safe as a child? Yeah, it did. Did it help me in situations where I felt like I didn't possess the ability to respond from a grounded, authentic place? So it gave me the ability to mask and show up as like 50% me and 50% of whatever I thought the situation needed. I spent the early part of my career in sales and learned very, very quickly that you can deliver a message in a variety of different ways. But it was always something of, am I cheating myself out of my authentic experience? Forget what this person on the other side is seeing. But how am I looking at myself when I'm doing this?
Do you think that, because when we're talking about this, I'm thinking about like where my shadow self came from. Do you think that our shadow is part of, like, do you think it's programming or do you think it's innate?
I think it's a both and.
Yeah.
Um, I think we condition it.
Mhm.
It gets conditioned by our lived experiences. Um, I'm a Scorpio. The stuff that lives in my head at different points in time, I mean, especially when I was younger, of all of these dark places that I would go. And it wasn't evil. It wasn't, I mean, it was part of the human condition. But when I started doing shadow work, I realized that at my most innate level, I respond more authentically to my shadow than any other part of me. I
Hmm.
am closer to my shadow. The relationship that exists in that space is more intimate, profound and even a little pathetic at different points in time. And when I was in a tremendous amount of pain and could barely function, my shadow kept me safe.
I was just gonna say, I can see the relationship there.
Yeah.
That's
And
interesting. I have a pretty intimate relationship with mine too, and when I visualize her, I sort of see her in the underworld, like in a dark cave. It's all black. Um, it is a very shadowy sort of experience and figure, but her her essence feels really innocent and young to me and like immature. Um, and I kind of feel her flailing, like that's when she's activated, it's that kind of energy, like, and it can be very dark. Um, yeah.
it's I see so much of my inner child in my shadow.
Yeah. That's why I asked the question of but that you're right, like I think it is both. Yeah.
And I mean, we certainly can point to the fact that wounding
Mhm.
results in shadow behavior.
Mhm.
That if at certain points in time we weren't mature enough or didn't have the tools to process emotion around a situation, and we were forced to be older than we were.
Mhm. And so how do you and it's like what do you do with that? So it sort of goes into all these spaces in your body,
Mm.
in your
I
psyche.
I can still carry on conversations completely logically with a great deal of charisma and be totally outside my body. And it almost always happens in situations where I am expected to play a role
Mm.
that we're expected to show up in certain ways when we're at work.
Mhm.
And where we divorce ourselves to a certain extent from our emotional experiences because the volume of emotional processing that would need to happen was beyond our maturity to do
Yeah.
or beyond our skill set to do. We didn't have the tools and we didn't have, I mean, and I still see this in my life today where, I'll be presented with an unfamiliar situation and I'll be looking at it and going, okay, that triggered me a little bit because I don't know how to deal with it. So it's managing uh, I feel outside of myself and I'm not quite sure how to respond. And then checking in with myself and actually asking, well, what do I want to do here?
Mhm.
And I mean, how
So
many times
that's
have
a key right there, what you just said, like getting to that number one, the level of awareness that you're talking about where you can see it and experience like so many people, and I'm sure you existed that way too for a while, where you don't even realize that you're living outside of yourself or functioning in that way or dissociating or whatever. So there's a very unconscious part of that. And I think there's a very unconscious part of shadow. And then when you bring it to light, and really what that means is just like bringing it to your self awareness, your conscious awareness, you're shining a light on it,
Mhm,
and then so what does shadow do in the light? It shrinks up, it runs away. So, and not to say that like we're pushing it away, but it's like once you shine a light on it, it can't take over, right? Like it kind of takes its rightful place.
mhm. And we get the ability to respond to it then instead
Mhm.
of dissociating,
Mhm.
reacting, and participating in a chain of events where at the end of it we go, well, maybe I could have handled that better. Oops.
I will say, doing inner child healing work really allowed me to get in touch with that girl, that part of me, like that shadow. I call her my like shadow girl. Um, and like sort of embrace her, and like coming at like sort of treating her like my inner child. Like I come with love now, like
Mhm.
open arms, like I'm sitting next to her and embracing her. And I say these things, and I'm sure that people listening might be like, that sounds crazy. But honestly, visualization is some of the best work that I've ever done. I'm a very visual person. And so for me, like in those spaces to actually visualize my child self, and get in touch with those parts of myself, all those parts, it allowed me to integrate all of those into the whole. And so she's not no, she's what do I call her? Not my shadow self, my exiled self.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's not exiled anymore. She gets to live in me, and I love her, and I appreciate all the ways that she tried to help me survive. Um, I can see the error of her ways. And I think that's so much of it. If when you get to a point where you can say, "You know what? I love you too." Like I love that part of me. I do. I love her. And not it feels like a different flavor of love. It's almost like a love that you have for a child that fucks up, and you're like, you still love that child. You just see that they made some bad choices, you know?
And when my niece was born, I remember saying to myself at the time, please give her the ability to see herself clearly.
Mm, mm.
And I thought to myself, it's a really interesting thing to wish for a little baby. And I was like, wait a minute. This isn't about my niece. This is about me. Shit, shit. Damn it. And I had a really good friend at the time who was incredibly wise and actually had a happy childhood. And I remember her talking about the relationship that talking and just my heart almost breaking inside of it. And I shortly thereafter went to my parents' house and pulled out some photo albums. And my mom did this great thing when we were kids where she put together year-long photo albums. So, 1985 was a year, 1986 was a year. And then at the end of elementary school, she made, and we took so many pictures when we were kids. She made us both our own photo albums that were us and our achievements. And I remember going through some of the albums and just looking at years where I absolutely hated the little girl in pictures.
Mm,
And as my niece has grown, as my other niece and nephew have grown, it's when I watch them make mistakes, I'm not judging them.
mhm.
I'm recognizing that they lack the maturity in certain situations and we need to go. Um, I understand and watch them figure out things on their own, but I'm not sitting in a place of judgment where I'm expecting them to behave
Mhm.
perfectly.
And to always know better and do better. Yeah.
Helps. 7. So my judgment of myself was happening when I was a young child.
Yeah.
So I started exiling my inner child while I was still a child.
That's very familiar to me too. And I
And
think
I
sometimes that comes with that level of like sensitivity, or because you and I process things very similarly mentally. So I wonder if that having that sort of increased or heightened awareness of the world or whatever it was that made us that way.
I know for me, my ability to emotionally process other people
Mhm.
as far as picking up on people's emotional states started very, very early.
Mhm.
I I mean, I remember sitting in a psychology class in high school and learning that some people don't actually have an inner monologue, that some people don't actually talk to themselves, that
Doesn't that seem so odd? And
like,
then there's a part of me that's a little jealous.
oh my God, I'm so jealous. Like, what would it be like to walk around in a grocery store and not have information coming to me in 17 different ways?
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, I loved that, I didn't love that period in history where only certain amounts of people were allowed in the grocery store because of COVID, but I also loved it
Yeah, I hear you.
because it was less information that I had to process and integrate.
That's why I DoorDash and Instacart.
Yeah.
It's I just went to Walmart today,
Oh,
and
I'm so sorry.
it's so overwhelming when you walk around and there's just so many people, and when you are like that, you just kinda you just I try to put myself in a bubble.
Mhm.
It helps, honestly, but it's still it's a hit up against my system. So,
Yeah, it's definitely one of those situations that when I get home and I unpack all the groceries, I am doing something very shortly thereafter that's going to run that energy out of my system.
mhm,
Whether it's physical exercise, whether it's doing some yoga, whether it's taking a bath, writing, I mean, all sorts of different things.
mhm. Well, that's a
Because,
great segue into, like, talking about how you manage, you know, because I mean, well, we talk about shadow work and you can burn out on that. Like, you
yeah,
can get to a place, and I'm really good at that, where
me too.
because I am such a I have such a strong desire to learn and grow in life, and I wanna excavate everything I can.
Mhm,
I wanna bring it all up. I wanna heal it. I wanna move forward with it, I wanna.
yeah,
And then it's like, number 1, I've learned that, um, continually digging at something is not always productive. And sometimes you just have to allow it. Like, I'm learning to allow. So if something comes up, it's sort of like it was surfaced
mhm,
and I see it and I'm like, acknowledging it, thanking it, appreciating it. But I no longer feel a need to go digging around. And that to me now, that feels like picking at wounds.
mhm,
Instead of letting it heal, it's like, oh, let me pick at that again. So I do think that you can take something like I think anything can be taken to an extreme, but I think that you can take a concept like shadow work and go too far where it becomes no longer productive, no longer healthy, you know, where it's
mhm.
sort of like masochistic and, you know,
At what point does it become self-harm?
yes.
At what point are we using it to inflict wounding on ourselves because on
hmm
some level that's comfortable and we're used to it?
And there's a difference between, I think, doing shadow work and like sort of like self victimization, right? Like I'm not looking at these parts of myself like feeling sorry for myself or looking at myself in any sort of victim way. It's it's actually empowering. It's like I see this, okay, I see that this is a part of me. I want to understand myself better. It's coming from that space. And I think there's always a fine line that people walk in that space.
It's how can I be both compassionate and accountable at the same
hmm
time?
Yeah.
For about 3 years, I committed to really excavating my stuff and going down and just looking at the places where there was a fair amount of shame,
hmm
where there was a fair amount of denial, and where there was a fair amount of reactivity when it would ever get surfaced. that I would respond to it as a knee jerk. I need I need to esteem myself in this situation immediately.
Yeah.
Or I need to, oh my God, I'm so ashamed of myself. I need to slink back down.
Mhm.
Um, and recognizing that there needs to be compassion for me, there needs to be compassion for the other people in the situation, and I have to account for it and respond to it in a different way. And it's not even so much have to, it's do I have the ability to?
Mhm.
Do I have the tools? And I have so many timeouts where I recognize that I am taking a constructive shadow working session and tipping it over into self harm.
Oh, you said that so well. Constructive. Yeah, I like that.
And normally, what happens is I start to feel it in my body first.
Yeah.
I almost, for me, when there's some emotional rigidity, when I'm burnt out, my hips naturally start to contract. And I notice that I'm like almost like clenching my hips together.
Mhm.
And that for me is I am working too hard to keep something in my body that doesn't belong there.
And I was just gonna say, it's so important to allow ourselves rest too, and a period of integration.
Mhm.
Like something might come up to be seen, right? And you're like, okay, I see you, I acknowledge, I'm taking the information from this. And then it needs to integrate into your being, into your psyche, into your body. And then you need a period of where, like, now you're operating and practicing life with that sort of newfound awareness. Um, I just think rest is so important, and I feel like our society is not set up in a way that allows for that time that we really do need. You know.
I didn't actually start focusing on resting until 2019. Like, it was just something that I didn't have time for.
Hmm.
There was this wound that needed to be healed. There was this life thing that needed to happen. And, I never thought that I would become one of those people that kept 14 balls in the air. But as soon as COVID started and I was looking at everything and everything's slowing down, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't function. Like, what am I going to do? And all of this stuff just kind of started to leak out the side. I've thought stuff that I thought I had control over. Because my mind is so busy, I tend to create routine in my life. So there, I don't have to think about certain things. Like I
Hmm.
get up at a certain time, I eat dinner at a certain time. Um, that allows me to have more fluidity in my life. And when COVID hit, I was suddenly like, I don't want any of this fluidity. And now it's everywhere.
Yeah.
How do I manage the parts of me that I have kept under lock and key for so long? I don't even have a relationship with them.
It was such a transformational time. I think I don't know any person that hasn't been impacted by COVID and the changes that were made during that time. Um, and I can see how. I mean, one of my favorite things that came out of that was, working from home and how
Mm.
that became more available. Um, but just like anything, it's like as humans, we have these concepts and these ways of being. And we can exploit anything. We can take anything to the extreme, right? Like I always say, everything is on a spectrum.
Yep.
And, but in terms of I mean, just living in a capitalistic society, the way that we operate in terms of, we want to monetize everything. And I get it. I get it. Money is the thing, right? Like we all need it. We all have to pay and have pay our part to participate in the game.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't know. I just think it seems like we've gone far out of balance. I do think we talked about this before we started talking, but I do think that especially younger generations who are really more tech savvy than we are going to level the playing field more. So I look forward to that. I think gatekeeping is going to go away, and I think that more people will have access that didn't have it before.
Mhm.
So I do look forward to some leveling of the playing field there.
Me too. And I look forward to more acceptance of diversity in all the ways that
Mm,
it appears in our world.
hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I think,
Including diversifying our income streams. Like
yep,
no longer are we reliant on one job to do it all, and the pressure of that is so intense, and that's why, I mean, especially for men, men have high suicide rates. And I think that
yeah,
that sense of responsibility that has been ingrained in them, you will hold this job and you are going to be the provider. And I know that's a very masculine energy thing, and I'm not trying to take that away. And at the same time, I want to honor men that like they do just sort of they kind of put their head down and they do the thing. But man, does that affects them. And
mhm,
if you don't have something that also brings you joy to fill your cup and balance that, that can be really depleting.
and very quickly.
Mhm.
And I think when we, as women, we have a little bit more freedom in our identity of what, I don't want to say successful, um, but we're allowed to cry.
Yeah.
We're we're allowed to be more emotional.
We get judged for it, but we are.
Yeah. Well, we get judged for it in the workplace.
But men are, I think they're judged more harshly by their peers.
Yeah.
Or it definitely, yeah, I think it takes away, unfortunately, I think it takes away. It doesn't in my eyes, but I think, if I see a man who's vulnerable and can shed some tears and talk about his feelings, I find that so hot.
Me too. Oh my god. Wow, that's really attractive. Oh my god.
I'm like, wow, he's so mature. Right. Or he's really in touch with himself, and I like that. I like that level of emotional maturity and emotional intelligence to be able to speak to it.
So do I.
Now, there could certainly be an imbalance there where, if somebody is just sort of always living in that space, whether you're male or female or whatever, however you identify, um, that, you know, that feels like some dysfunction there too. And I've operated like that before and blamed it on all kinds of things. I'm Cancer. I'm really emotional. I'm really moody, like whatever. And I had to like get that was part of my stuff too, like my shadowy stuff. Like, actually, you don't have to let your emotions rule you. So why don't we look at that? um, but yeah.
Yeah. And that's, looking at in the same way that we don't want shadow to rule us, we don't want emotions to rule
Hmm.
us, but we don't want thought to rule us.
Any of it, yeah.
If you dip over into one extreme, there's going to be a vacuum someplace else. And that's where shadow creeps in.
Hmm.
It's in that, at least for me, if I'm denying a certain part of myself for whatever reason I'm denying it, and it doesn't really seem to matter, that if I am choking a voice,
Hmm.
it's going to come out somewhere else.
Well, I think that's you when you were talking earlier and you said some key words there. And I think denial is one of them. Like, I think if you're in denial or there's a part of yourself that you are denying, um, there's definitely shadow at play. Reactivity, high reactivity, especially, is one of them. And I think that's also tied to unconscious behaviors and patterning. Those are big red flags for me in terms of like, okay, there's something that I need to look at here. And then it's how does this feel in my body? This does
Hmm.
not feel good. I usually feel it in my stomach. It's just that sort of pit in my stomach feeling, and
Oh, yes.
yeah, I'm like,
I
all
call
right, there's
that.
something I got to look at here. But I'm at a place now where like that used to bother me, and now it's like I appreciate that my body is so intelligent that it can tell me this info, like that it's communicating with me. So I just come at it from a different perspective now. So,
And you have a relationship with it.
yeah, yeah, a healthier one.
Mhm.
Hmm.
So it's not all or nothing. It's
And it
response over reaction.
and it doesn't rule me. And I think that's important too. What you were saying, like, I don't want to be ruled by anything. I want to be a free being here on this planet. And so, in order to do that, I have to look at all the things in my life or about myself, really, because it's really my relationship with me. Um, and then address those things. And, I'm only as free as I allow myself to be.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and that's a really good question. How do we advocate for freedom inside of ourselves?
mm,
How do we even define that? And is it freedom or is it dissociation? Because I know for years, some of the freedom that I was seeking was just less intensity.
hmm. So, do you feel like it was like escapism and that gave you a sense of freedom?
Yes, it
Freedom
gave
from
me a
the
sense of,
situation in the moment. I can see that, yeah. And I think that I bet a lot of people who, struggle with avoidant attachment, well, they might not struggle with it, but the people who love them probably struggle with it.
yeah.
Because if you're an avoidant, like I hate to label anybody like that, but, like, if you have avoidant tendencies, you probably feel very free in those moments because 'cause
Hmm.
you're not having to deal with the thing that bothers you. Um, but the difference is that you have to come back to it at some point, or if you don't come back to it, it is going to continue to repeat itself in your life, and that's the thing for me. It's like, sometimes you don't know, and sometimes you just start to see the pattern because 'cause you're like, "I've been here before. Why am I here again?" It's different people, but it's a similar feeling. So what is this? And that's definitely an indicator. Um, that there's something there that's got a hold on me, and I don't want anything to have a hold on me
Hmm.
like that. So then it's like, okay, how can I start going into what I call troubleshooting, and I'm like, how can I get free here?
Yep. And most often I have to create space between whatever the issue is
Mhm.
and my response. And
Mhm.
that's where the tools come in.
Yep.
That's the, okay, am I moving my physical body? Am I drinking enough water? And I know that sounds so silly,
No, it's
but
so important though.
yeah, it if I'm dehydrated, if I'm not eating enough, I mean, all of these things that, and I'm an adrenaline junkie, not because I actually like the feeling of adrenaline, but because it was the only way I could function
Yeah.
for so long. And because I was the type of alcoholic that was pretty much drunk all day towards the end, I was never in my body.
Mm.
So coming back into my body,
It's painful, I bet.
oh my God, it was
Yeah.
insane. Like I
Yeah.
broke out in rash for 6 months straight. That's how allergic I was to being in my own power.
Yeah.
That's how much it scared me, and I didn't have the tools for it. So in the beginning, it was less about changing the behavior as it was recognizing when the behavior's triggered
Yeah.
and creating space between the, oh my God, I want to do something destructive. Oh my God, I want to just numb out. Um, and then saying, okay, well, what are the ways that I can gently be with myself
Yes.
and not have to do anything? Not, I mean, even I mean, in the beginning, there was no excavation of shadow. There was simply sitting with it enough that I didn't try to change my state.
Well, and I think that's a really key part of this too, is I mean, we could talk all we want about shadow work and what it is, but if you don't have that level of self-awareness, it doesn't mean anything. You have to be able to, I say this all the time, we have to face the mirror. We have to look in the mirror y- and see and be willing to see those parts of ourselves that we're not always the good girl. We're not always somebody's favorite or what I'm just, using silly examples, but like, I think not um like denying that that aspect even exists in the first place is really important because we all have it. And so that's important too. And we all have these aspects that exist within us, And so
Mm.
to walk around and pretend like, it's a huge red flag for me if somebody acts like they don't have anything or
Yeah.
they're just, 'cause I'm like,
And I know we both have experiences with individuals that have said like, "Oh, I've totally cleared my shadow. It's all love
yeah.
and light right now.
Mhm.
Everything's just divine and
Mhm.
it's happy and it's flowery." And I'm like, "No, it's not. You're
Now,
still
I think you
you're
can
still
get
in a
to a
human body."
place in like I think of like a monk, right? Like I think you can get to a place where perhaps you do live in a more blissful state, right? Like I don't think that I don't imagine that like I'll ever do the amount of work, the shadow work that I've done at this point. Like I do think that I've reached a place of like wholeness and integration. So I don't think that it will be the same uh like my relationship with it is very different. Um And that allows me to live in a more peaceful, joyful, blissful state. I can sustain that longer. Um,
Yes.
but that's not I'm not that way every day, all day, you know, that's just not, I don't think that's a reality.
No. I
Maybe, I don't want to take away from anybody else. I mean, maybe there are people who have really learned to achieve that. I just sort of see it as a dance that we sort of always have to do.
It's a relationship too.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Lifelong.
lifelong.
Hmm.
And the Jen of today is much more capable of meeting my shadow with compassion and accountability
Hmm.
than I was in the beginning. So something that 5 years ago I would have considered shadow work today is just what I consider
Life.
being, but yeah, life.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
that, you know, same shit, different day.
Yeah. So, what could we leave people with in terms of like how they could integrate or if they, wanted to do some shadow work, like what would be a good place to start? What do you think? I will say one thing that helped me, again, I'm very visual. Um, I sort of did this meditation with myself where I imagined that I was inside a house and I'm at the kitchen table and there's food on the table and you're detailed about what's on the table, the food. There's a place setting for, there's so many place settings. And there's different parts of me at each setting. And there's an open setting and it's like it's for my exiled self. And she's outside, like she's outside on the front porch. She's not allowed in. And so I actually see myself like going up, opening the door and like welcoming her in to like have a seat at the table, and that's like the table of my life. And she
Mhm.
gets to have a seat there too, everybody does. And it's like with welcome arms. It's not like, oh, you can come in too. It's like, oh, you need to be in here. And so just really making that, part of myself.
Mhm. I very early on pulled some pictures of myself as a child
Mm, mhm.
of periods where I hated myself. I'm that kid. And I brought them out and I let them live.
Yeah.
I put them in frames and I looked at them. And I started to recognize that this little being was in so much pain all the time that she had no idea how to manage it and that everything was not how it felt, but how people responded to it.
Mhm.
And I gave her permission to just exist freely in my life.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
Very similar to letting her in and having her have a seat at the
Seat at the
table.
table. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
because there are so many jewels and nuggets of where we exile ourselves, the things that we learn while we're there. And they're deeply, deeply personal.
Well, that's it
They
too.
are.
I think, um, shadow work is absolutely something that you can do on your own, and I and it's also something that I do with others. Um, I mean, I have sort of a team of different counselors that I work with for different reasons. Um, but essentially, it's just really like you want to be in a safe space or in a safe container with someone or certain people who can hold space for those parts of you that
Mhm.
you're not proud of, you know, with love. And that's what it is. It's being seen and cared for and supported with love, you know, in that dark space.
Yeah. It, because it is exiled, has not been nourished in a very long time.
Yeah.
So, of course, it's reactive.
Mhm.
Of course, mine is always very sharp and terse. So I've recognized the signature of excavation, so to speak.
Mhm.
And it is not in the moments where I'm lighting the world on fire. So I think there's also a fair amount of getting back in my body and how to do that. And certainly things like taking baths
Mhm.
that forced me to slow down, putting down my phone.
Slowing down is a big one.
Yeah,
Yeah, being in your body is so important. It's so important anyway, but especially when you're working on these parts of yourself and trying to integrate and become a whole being. Um, I think it's so important to be present and grounded in your body. And for people who have had a hard time with that, who spend a lifetime dissociating, numbing out, running away from that, that can be a very challenging, very real experience.
yeah. Curiosity has helped me a lot too,
Oh my gosh.
especially in the
Yeah.
parts that I don't like and I don't understand why they're coming out.
Oh, I think that's so good. I'm so glad you said that. I think coming at yourself with curiosity, approaching yourself in that way is so much more productive and conducive to healing than coming at it with judgment at all.
Yeah, coming at it at judgment, I'm only going to see one side of it.
Mhm.
And with curiosity, it allows me to look at it. I mean, one thing I like to do is if someone else was behaving in this way, how would I look at it? And almost always, when it's someone else, I immediately get curious and I
Mhm.
start asking, well, what factors could be playing out in their life that could be producing this behavior? And that's the empathy,
Yeah.
and that's the grace. And I am far more willing to extend you grace than I am me.
Mhm.
And
I totally am that way too. It is much harder for me to forgive myself. I have very high expectations for myself.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it some of that for me has come because I do think so fast on my feet.
Mhm.
It was a country song, and I don't remember who it was, but I'm as good once as I ever was.
Mm.
And I don't want to be as good once. I want to be as good consistently. And if that means that the consistency is slightly less impressive to prevailing ideas, then fine, because I have to sustain it.
Yeah.
And there are times where we push ourselves into burnout because it's absolutely necessary at the time. And there's also the, am I feeding the burnout?
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
am I feeding the burnout because I want the adrenaline and it's just easier to keep my head down and do the thing and not deal with it today.
Right.
And it's
Well,
okay to not
and
deal with something.
sometimes I think also you can, like when your body is used to, right, like muscle memory, cell memory. So when your body is used to experience, like you had said earlier, I'm an adrenaline junkie. Like it's because your body is used to churning out adrenaline because it's what you're used to. So, and that's the pattern. And so it's like, number one, it's always back to that awareness of I see that I'm in this pattern, and to even be able to speak to that at all and say, I have this, I can tell that adrenaline is pumping through me right now, or even just to have that awareness that it is happening. Um, I think so many people operate on autopilot, and then it's easier to blame other people for our problems than it is to look at ourselves and our role in that dynamic. And that's something that really shifted for me. Like I just anytime I'm in a situation with someone, especially in relationship, or if I'm feeling something in response to relationship, I mean, I certainly, consider where other people are coming from and whatever, but I'm always looking at my role too in the dynamic, in the dance.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
And looking at our dynamic is where we find that freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because if we're exercising a pattern that's existing as muscle memory, but isn't actually indicative of some of our core beliefs, of all the different things that inform the way that we make choices,
Mm-hmm.
it's being willing to, and that's the curiosity again, engage new ideas.
Yeah.
And they don't need to be drastic.
Yeah.
It's like,
It can be very simple.
yeah, maybe what if instead of raising my hand in a situation and saying, I can help, because trust me, I always want to help.
Mm-hmm.
I always want to help. And if I can help, then I really want to help. But the thing is, am I overgiving and I want to help because I really want to help and I have the ability to help? Or do I want to help because I just want to numb out and not have to think about all of the places in my life where I'm not helping myself?
Well, and I mean, as you're saying that, like I can tell, like the shadow part of being an empath is like we want to rescue everybody and we want to come in and we want to, I mean, I'm speaking from my own experience, and these are lessons I've had to learn, like overextending myself and wanting to save everybody else and whatever. And number one, that like in hindsight, I look at that and I'm like, wow, you really thought very highly of yourself that you could go in there and just fix it for everybody.
Here's the thing. Here's the tricky part about being a highly intelligent empath with a lot of psychology training is sometimes you actually can.
Well, okay. So yeah, if we go there and it's actually like something that I can do, it's not, it's then it becomes, am I wanting to do this because I want to help that person alleviate their suffering? Or is it because it's going to make me feel better because I'm uncomfortable with them being uncomfortable, especially when it's right? Like I'm talking about people that you're close with, like, you know, um, somebody that I, would be dating and maybe they're going through something and I want to be supportive, but they don't really want or need my support, and then I take that like as, oh my gosh, like you're not letting me like and make it about me, like that's shadow. That's not me actually being helpful and like holding a safe space for that person to process because I made that experience, which is theirs, about my stuff.
Mhm.
And I think that we can do that. Like, I definitely, especially in my early days of even just before I went through like my schooling, but I had some background in psychology, and my own therapy. I'd walk around, especially in my family, and be like, I'm sure that they all thought that I thought I was a know-it-all. And I'm at the point now where I do have ideas of certain things and I will share stuff, but it's very different now. It's not coming from a place of like, oh, I know better. But I definitely went through a period of I felt like I knew better. And,
Me
you know,
too.
now there's so much that I'm aware that I just don't know. And there's so much nuance to consider, and that we're all so very different that I've just changed that, like, from I know better to like I'm so curious. I'm so curious, and then I wonder if I have something that I can offer, and it's just a very different space to operate from.
It's recognizing that it's a matter of perspective
Mhm. Yeah.
and really understanding that there are perspectives that inform people's choices that we have no clue about,
Yes.
no embodied understanding.
Yes.
And I joke, I'm not a parent. I'm around kids all the time. I love them. I'm people's favorite aunt. And I don't actually have the experience of being a parent. And it it's that I won't parent other people's kids without their direct consent because I recognize that I don't have enough informed and embodied perspective.
Well, consent is a huge,
Well, yeah, that's an
huge issue.
entirely
And that
different.
even that, I mean, that was definitely part of my journey in sort of reeling my empath self in. It's like I don't have that person's consent to tap into their energy.
No.
And just because I can doesn't mean I need to or should.
Mhm.
So really learning that part of me, and because at first it was just something that I just did. I didn't think it wasn't on purpose. It was unconscious. And then when it became more conscious and I was like, no, I don't actually have to do that. And if I notice something, I don't have to say anything either because it's not always for me to do that. So I've just really approached that very differently in the last couple of years, and it's been very freeing
Yeah.
because I'm not weighed down by everybody else's stuff anymore, or my sense of like I'm gonna rescue people, or I'm gonna, that like sense of responsibility has been brought down too. So just nice.
Yeah. And being able to show up
Yeah. Yeah.
as you are in the moment and
Yeah.
not as, at least for me, this persona that I've created of this is Jen at the office. Like I'm allowing myself humanity.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Oh, I love that. I think that'll be a good place to end on too, like allowing ourselves our humanity, because that's what I want to say is like our shadow self is a part of us.
Hmm.
And to make ourselves whole, we cannot deny that that part exists. We cannot exile that part of us. Um, and the longer that we do that, the more I think suffering we incur. So,
And the more intense excavation that we may have to go
mm,
through later.
yeah, yeah. So for anybody that's, if they're working on shadow stuff right now, or I mean, I'd love to, between both of us, we have plenty of people in our sphere that,
Yes, we do.
are great facilitators for working through those things. So I would say if it's something that people have questions on, I want to be open to being a resource for that. Um,
Absolutely.
and, you know, I'm sure we could go on about this topic because
Yeah,
it's such an important part of who we are, but
I have so much content that I've created over the years that's basically just like one pagers of, oh, hey, this is, I mean, because it was like getting curious with myself. What
hmm
do I actually like? If there were not these external constraints around certain things, what would I be doing right now? And one of my favorite games to play is what if I won the lotto and I never had to work again?
hmm I wonder if coming up with some prompts, like, because journaling is such an important part of my life. I don't even know what I would do without writing. Um, but I'll have to think about that. Maybe when I share this episode, I will share some prompts of just my own, I like to ask myself questions in journals. Like I'll just write some questions and then I answer them. And sometimes I do that. Like I'll write the question with my dominant hand and I'll answer it with my non-dominant hand. And just allows you, it's kind of like EMDR for me. It kind of allows you to tap into different parts of your brain. Um, so yeah, I think when I do that, I might share some prompts to help people um, just work through, getting in touch with their shadow self or ways that they can work through things that are coming up for them. Like how can I bring compassion here or whatever.
Mm.
Um, so
I mean, I did some writing exercises a number of years ago where I intervened, like as adult Jen, I
yes.
came in and
Hmm.
intervened on experiences that were in my childhood. I was shocked as hell to find out that the places where I most needed the wise version of me was less in early childhood and more in my teenage years,
Yeah.
of me stepping in and saying, no, we're going to do this differently. And what does that look like?
Yeah. I've
Absolutely.
definitely had to parent my inner teenager
Yeah.
into my 40s.
Still doing it. Cheers.
Well, I really appreciate having this conversation with you. This is
Me
very
too.
enlightening for me. I love some of the things that we touched on. So thank you for being willing to go there.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for being willing to go there yourself. And you're very welcome.
Thanks for joining me for this episode of All the Things.